So I wanted to talk about a term that I use and kind of comes up relatively often, and really note the difference between liberal theology and progressive Christianity. I think these terms can be conflated sometimes. And when I say liberal in terms of theology, it's not just colloquial, it's actually pretty well defined. Whereas progressive Christianity is a little bit more of a pathos within culture. So the difference basically is this. Just to give a brief history of what liberal theology actually is. In the 18th to 19th century, and officially in the 19th century, a brilliant theologian, Friedrich Schleiermacher, he came up with this system as a response basically to the Enlightenment and kind of emerging out of the Romanticist movement. And his intention here really was apologetic in nature. He was responding to all of the philosophy that had been coming out and really, in some sense, pushing people away from theistic thinking, or at the very least, orthodox thinking. And so he came up with this new theology that is now called liberal theology. And really, it was the first systematized theology. So, interestingly enough, the first systematic theology was actually liberal theology. And in short, Schleiermacher's whole system was kind of based around this idea of the God consciousness. And essentially, it was the connection that Jesus, the Christ, had with the God consciousness that kind of allows the rest of us to have the same connection as well. And so there's a lot more we can say about this. But coming from that, this was, I guess for lack of a better term, a lot more viable, seemingly theologically, for a lot of intellectuals and a lot of leaders at the time. And this actually became a well-embraced system. And for maybe 100 years or so, liberal theology started to take root very strongly and was well established amongst a variety of scholars. And not that it still isn't, but it was more or less the majority in a variety of places, the majority thought. So this kind of gained strength in the 19th century as we started to discover more in the areas of biblical studies and science. So geology and biology were starting to realize that evolution is a reality that we didn't understand before. And in biblical studies, we started to realize that there's a lot about the Bible that we didn't understand before as well, and just doesn't really make sense. And so we had to kind of rethink a lot of things. And this has, kind of developed us to what we have today in, the field of biblical studies. And this is largely due to a lot of archaeology that was being done at the time. So, because of these advances in our understanding of biblical studies and science, liberal theology really started to take root in a really powerful way. So, over the next century, in the 20th century, this is where things like neo-orthodoxy and fundamentalism kind of emerged as a response to liberal theology. But the point being, liberal theology is actually a very defined, well-established system of theological thought in the Christian world. Now, the idea of progressive Christianity, this is somewhat different because it actually can emerge out of orthodoxy, and it could even, emerge within evangelical spaces. So one could consider themselves orthodox in certain senses, and yet consider themselves progressive Christians, because progressivism really, as a lot of people probably are familiar with, is largely a matter of social and political matters. Things like, LGBTQ equality and abortion rights, etc. But, foundationally, the theology of it could align just fine with someone who considers themselves evangelical or orthodox. So it's really just a matter of the issues that emerge out of it. Whereas liberal theology, very foundationally, has these major differences from kind of the literal affirmations of traditional orthodoxy. So often progressive Christianity does emerge out of liberal theology, but it's not necessary. And so these terms shouldn't be conflated and they shouldn't be equated. And also, liberal theology, that term shouldn't just be, it shouldn't be hand waved away. It's just kind of a colloquial term that's aligned with political ideas because it's its own system within Christian theological thinking. And largely is the foundation for what we know as liberal Protestantism today. And there are, this is where like mainline churches and some others kind of fall into place. So that's sort of the basic difference between liberal theology and progressive Christianity. And that's something that we should definitely keep in mind as we have these conversations moving forward with each other.